My wife Janet Baracco and I moved here in the year 2000, and we selected it as a typical suburban house and backyard. At the time we bought it, this was kind of a wreck. The house was just almost a tear down. The backyard was all just Bermuda grass. So what we did was fix up the house, minimally, but we put most of our effort into the backyard, and it's taken 10 years really to take out the Bermuda grass, put in a dozen garden beds, 25 fruit and nut trees. We have a solar food dryer. We have solar cookers. We have solar photovoltaics making our electricity for us. We have a solar hot water heater heating our water for us. We have chickens in the backyard. My name's Richard Heinberg. I am Senior Fellow with Post Carbon Institute, and I've written a number of books on resource depletion, particularly oil depletion. About a dozen years ago, I realized how central energy, and particularly oil, are for the economy, that we've created this modern industrial way of life because we had the cheap oil to do it with, enabling us to manufacture more stuff and transport it further distances. So that's led to more and more GDP growth year after year after year. But if oil is a finite resource, and if we're getting to the end of the low-hanging fruit, if we're having to search further and dig deeper all the time to get lower quality resources, that's got to have some impact on the economy. And yeah, that's exactly what's going on. We're building this fence so we can keep the chickens in one part of the yard and they don't get into the garden. They love getting out of their little pen and digging around, but they also love eating our garden veggies.
Since we do talk a lot about peak oil, how do we know when
oil production's peaking?
Yeah.
Oh, that's easy. The phrase peak oil has gained some currency over the last few years. The idea, of course, is not that we're running out of oil, but that as we finish off the low-hanging fruit, we get to a point where oil becomes more and more expensive to produce, harder to produce, and production hits a maximum and begins to decline. We've seen that in individual oil wells and oil fields, whole oil-producing countries like the United States. 100 years ago, half the world's oil was coming from oil wells in Texas and Southern California and Pennsylvania. We were the world's foremost oil exporting nation, but since 1970, we've seen our oil production gradually decline. This is happening in more and more countries. As the price of oil goes up, that means that the average person has to pay more and more at the gas pump. They have less and less to spend on everything else, their house mortgage, buying groceries. And so as people spend less on other things, the economy starts to contract. And very few people understand what's going on. They think it's all a problem within the financial system. They completely miss the fact that it has to do with natural resources. All of this has taken investment and time, but we have a home that actually works for us. It's growing our food, it's heating our water, it's making our power for us. Of course, if our dependence on oil is a problem, the natural solution is to go to alternative energy sources. But there are a couple of problems with that. First is the market doesn't incentivize that, because as oil prices go up, maybe for a while that does incentivize investment in alternative energy sources, but the other thing it does is it causes the economy to start to come apart at the seams, and there's just less investment capital for anything. And so over the past few years, we've actually seen investment capital go out of alternative energy sources. This is one of the paradoxes, actually, of the whole energy transition. We need to start that transition, and we need to invest in it before it's economical to do so. We should have started this energy transition back in the 1970s, but what happened was in the 1980s, oil got really cheap again, and that took away the incentives that we had in the 70s to begin experimenting with solar and wind power and putting in higher gas mileage regulations for vehicles and reducing the speed limits on our highways and so on. So we changed all that. We went back to gas guzzling. Americans started buying bigger cars again, and here we are today, and we have very little time to make the transition and very little investment capital. So if fossil fuels are the problem and the solution is alternative energy, but the alternative energy sources really aren't up to it and we haven't been investing enough, that would seem to suggest that we're in for a very difficult few decades, and I think that's true. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, though. What it does mean is that it's the end of a certain kind of economy, a growth-based, fast-paced economy that is constantly globalizing all sorts of processes of production and consumption. We're headed instead toward an economy that is shrinking, that is becoming more localized. We're pretty much self-sufficient during the summer in terms of garden veggies and fruit and also walnuts and almonds. But we still buy a lot of food during the year, particularly the calorie crops, grains. We grow a lot of potatoes, and we're pretty self-sufficient in terms of potatoes, but grain crops are kind of difficult to manage on a quarter-acre backyard. As fossil fuels get more expensive, inevitably a few things are going to happen. We're going to be producing more locally, we'll be making more with our hands. You know, we substituted machines for human labor over the course of the 20th century. This happened particularly in agriculture. A lot of people really like growing food for a living. Well, guess what? As fuel for tractors gets more expensive, as fuel for the 18-wheelers that drive up to the back of every supermarket every day to unload food from thousands of miles away, as that fuel gets more expensive, we're going to need more locally produced food. So that means there will be lots of opportunities for young farmers to begin producing food, to begin to take on a way of life that's inherently satisfying. It's hard work, but you know, guess what? We human beings actually like hard work. We love a challenge, we love to get our hands dirty, and we love to see the results of our effort.
Can I see your tiny house?
Sure. Yeah, this was an experiment in natural building. For a decade, I taught a college program on sustainability, one of the first ones in the country, and some of my students helped construct this building using recycled materials, using natural materials, lime plaster. My wife uses it as a massage studio. We also use it as kind of a meditation room. I take naps in here. This is slightly less than 120 square feet, which means it's a building of no consequence, which also meant that we did not have to get a permit from the city or the county in order to build it. I've lived in spaces this size before. It was great, yeah.
You know, there's a lot of that happening.
Yeah, that was part of what inspired us to build this, that whole tiny homes movement. Yeah. If the economy is going to be contracting, that means we will be cutting back. The question is, can we do that in a way that actually makes life better? And I think we can. Particularly in the Western industrial countries, we've gotten used to levels of consumption that are not only environmentally unsustainable, they also don't make us happy. They've, in fact, hollowed out our lives. We've given up things that actually do give us satisfaction and pleasure so that we can work more and more hours to get more and more money with which to buy more and more stuff, more flat-screen TVs, bigger SUVs, bigger houses, and it's not making us happier. Well, guess what? It's possible to downsize, it's possible to use less, become more self-sufficient, grow more of your own food, have chickens in your backyard, and be a happier person. They're extremely entertaining. We've only had them a short time. They're still pullets. They're not laying yet, but they're certainly members of the family, and they're real characters. They get really spoiled. We can, in fact, increase people's quality of life as their consumption declines. It's mostly a matter of what we aim for. Because we've created a financial system that depends on growth, we've been aiming for GDP growth above everything else. That is the measure of the health of nations. But if we aim instead for the integrity of our environment, the quality of our community life as goals, then we can achieve those things while actually reducing our consumption. Imagine if we were making more stuff for ourselves, making higher quality products that could be repaired almost indefinitely. Would that make us less happy? On the contrary, I think it would make us much happier. But we haven't been doing that because it doesn't increase the GDP. Planned obsolescence increases the GDP. Stoking human wants that can't be satisfied, that increases the GDP. So we have to change our fundamental economic model. If we do that, we can adapt. The windows are the Fibonacci series. It's the beginning of the series, 1, 1. It's an additive series. 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 1 is 3, 2 and 3 would be 5, 5 and 3 would be 8, and so on. And of course, as the series goes along, the ratio of each two numbers in the series begins to approach this irrational number called phi, the golden mean, which is embedded in nature in all kinds of wonderful ways. Something that's happened over the course of the Industrial Revolution is that we have become more and more distanced, both from the people around us, but also from the natural world. You know, we are embedded in nature. We are animals. And our survival is linked to the health of our environment. But using cheap fossil fuels, we've created artificial environments, bigger and bigger houses, shopping malls, cars. I mean, cars are like a little metal and glass and plastic environment. As we have gone about making our backyard permaculture garden, we've been as concerned with aesthetics and with beauty as with productivity, because we want a beautiful place to live. We want to feel that our environment is feeding us spiritually as well as nourishing us physically. When you can make something with your hands that is unique and that took some forethought and care, that's beautiful. And nature is constantly making beauty, whether it's, you know, a tomato plant or a hummingbird. You know, nature's economy and thoughtfulness in aerodynamics and color is continually amazing. And what we produce with our industrial machinery by comparison is very often sort of arid and dictated by the machines that we're using.
Do you think that, is it a bit of a Luddite future?
Well, you know, the Luddites were people in the early industrial period who saw the process of industrialization taking place, and they saw that some people were winning and some people were losing. And most of the people who were in the crafts industries were coming out on the losing end, and the people who owned the factories were winning big time. So if our future is a Luddite future in the sense that we can reclaim production for the common person, then yeah, maybe so. I don't think that's a bad thing. If we think of Luddites as just being people who hate all technologies, I think that's a misreading of history. And it's also a misreading of our future. We are clever animals. We have created all kinds of sophisticated tools so far, and we will continue to do so in the future. Over the course of the 20th century, we were creating technologies to use an abundance of cheap, concentrated energy. In the 21st century, we'll be inventing tools to enable us to do things more easily using less in the way of fossil fuel energy. And that's going to be just as big a challenge. As oil gets more expensive and scarce, we're going to need to use it more intelligently. We're enormously dependent on this stuff. So we are going to have to do a little triage, you know, figure out where we really still need to use oil, let's say for food production, particularly in grain production. You know, we could grow most or even all of our fruits and vegetables using hand labor. But going back to producing wheat with animal power and human labor, that's a big stretch. That's not going to happen anytime soon, and not very many people would really want to do that. So we want to preserve some oil for that, for necessary transportation, for hospitals, for the things we need to continue. But do we still want to use oil for driving half a mile to get to the movie theater? No. It's too precious, and there's too little of it left. And you know, it would be great if we left some of this stuff for our children and grandchildren. They might think of something really cool to do with it. But the way we're going right now, there's going to be none left. They will not have that opportunity.